Assalamu alaikum and welcome to everyone. Welcome back to another episode of DigiPod on DawnNews English. I'm your host, Usama Khilji. Today, we'll be talking about what's the chatter around the firewall in Pakistan. We're hearing that a firewall, reports of which emerged in the year 2024, is now being rolled back. But these are unconfirmed reports from other media outlets. But meanwhile, it begs the question, what really is a firewall? How does it function? What are the technical capabilities of a firewall? And to learn about this and a lot more, we're joined by a tech and cyber crime journalist, Sindhu Abbasi. Thank you very much for joining us, Sindhu, and we're looking forward to this conversation with you to learn better what a firewall is, how it works, what are the technical capabilities, and maybe you have investigated this in the past and you've written extensively on the tech infrastructure in Pakistan as well, so you can tell us how it really works. To start with, amid controversy in Pakistan over an alleged social media firewall project or internet firewall project, the debate has blurred a basic question: what is a firewall? So maybe you can walk us through the details of it.
Hi, Osama. Thank you for having me. So, what is a firewall? A firewall is a computer network security system which works at both the hardware and software level, and depending on how it is configured. It is an essential part of a cyber security system for especially large organizations. A firewall can, for example, stop people outside of an organization from accessing the data of that organization. You might have noticed if you go to the bank and if you're in need of internet, they will not give you their password, Wi-Fi password. And a firewall is also used for blocking potentially spam and fraud websites for employees because clicking on suspicious links or opening spam websites can also allow hackers or anyone outside an organization a path into the organization's network system. A
No, thank
brief
you. And that's a very
description.
good, yes, that's a very good and brief description of what, a technical level firewall at an organizational level is. But could you compare this with how firewalls at a national level function, that are especially run by governments?
So, firewalls were not conceptualized as a system that can or should be used at this scale, which covers an entire country. It is for organizations. If the focus is security, not surveillance or blocking content that the authority concerned does not like. Its use on a national level is for filtering content that the state deems as propaganda or simply doesn't like. In China, for example, VPNs are banned. They use filtering and surveillance on a mass scale to block content and to carry out surveillance. They use deep packet inspection. As we know, Pakistan also has a firewall or a web monitoring system, as they call it. Sometimes they also call it web management system, which is just incorrect. And with some of these features, such as deep packet inspection as well. So last year, around September, I think there was a huge, unprecedented leak of the internal data of China's Great Firewall. And people can look that up if they want to read about the technical details, which many cybersecurity professionals have written blogs about now. It also showed that China has exported this tech to various countries, including Pakistan, Myanmar, and countries in Asia and Africa.
Interesting. So what we understand now is that a firewall is present there for cybersecurity measures, but what states use it for is essentially surveillance and censorship. But it'll be interesting to know more about the architecture of it. So who really builds a firewall? How is it deployed in the technical and industrial ecosystem? And I think it's important for us to understand this. You talked about deep packet inspection technology. So maybe you can run us a bit through, how it works.
So, how do firewalls work at a technical level? So, if I were to give a relatable example or something that maybe a non-techie person is able to understand, I'll give this example of, how in historical fiction shows, Game of Thrones and Lord of the Rings, They have these huge castles which are heavily fortified, are manned by a lot of soldiers, and there are multiple levels and strategies for securing the castle. So, computer network security or a firewall can also be thought about this way. They work on different levels of firewalls, such as on the hardware level and software level. What this means is at the software level, for example, an organization might ask you to have two-factor authentication for your company Gmail, use updated and licensed software such as licensed Microsoft products. And on the physical level, the organization, especially if it is a big organization which has its own data centers or a physical network security setup, maybe, it should physically secure that data center or the physical security setup. And then there is, for example, what we call port security. So ports are, in simple words, physical connection points in a network. For example, the LAN ports on your laptop or a computer that you connect with, the LAN wire on your internet device, right? We use Wi-Fi these days mostly, but if you work in an organization, your computer is still connected to that LAN wire. So both those points where the wire goes are ports. There are USB ports, as we know. So these are some of the more simple examples of security where the cybersecurity practices and measures are used at every level, on the physical level, on the software level. There are different levels of the modern network communication system, and security is employed on all those levels. So deep packet inspection is basically the a basic network security practice includes monitoring traffic coming on into a network, so as to make sure that no intruder or no outsider or a hacker is able to get into the network. It's quite basic, which tells you if the packet is from within the organization, if the data packet is coming from within the organization or from outside, and such things. In deep packet inspection, what happens is that the technology is able to identify contents within that data packet, right? So what happens is that they can know where that data packet originated, where it's supposed to go, even the contents of it. And this level of deep packet inspection is not necessary a lot of the times for uh, mid-level or small organizations, but for big organizations or with sensitive data, such as banks, they might use it for as part of their firewalls. But on a national scale, it is used for surveillance purposes. There is really no need um, for it for security, network security, unless it's the specific government departments and not on the national level.
Right. So from what you're saying is that at the gateway level, when deep packet inspection technology is installed, it's essentially a monitoring tool.
Yeah, because if so in computer network security, the basic what the basic tenets of the of cybersecurity is that it's supposed to be decentralized, right? So you can't just install a firewall on the national level, a centralized measure, or maybe a couple of deep packet technology inspection technologies on different points in the infrastructure and think that you have achieved a very high level of security. Um, yeah, I'll be going in detail into these things in the next questions.
Yeah. So, no, that's very, very helpful to understand the context, right? And what we've heard about happening in Pakistan is on one level, we have the web monitoring system. And on the other level, some reports have told us about how the firewall has been installed at various internet service provider levels, where it has a different function. than the web monitoring system. But maybe we can now come to, the idea of security versus control, because, as you explained in the beginning very well, how the firewall is usually put in is for cybersecurity measures. But then what you spoke about, how at scale when it's employed or deployed, it becomes more of a tool of control, monitoring, and surveillance. So how are countries using this in order at telecom gateways, for example, and what function does that really have on the overall economy, especially in the IT sector?
So, if we look at the EU and other liberal progressive democracies, for example, network security, as I said, is not implemented in the form of a centralized blocking mechanism, but is decentralized, which is actually the right way to secure an entire country. The regulations and policies in the UK and EU, for example, talk about infrastructure level security, for example, energy grids, transportation system, security of the government departments and assets. And then they also have regulations that mandate the private sector to follow certain standard security guidelines as well. So there's a centralized firewall. But if you look at Pakistan, we have a firewall, but not a fraction of that effort or money seems to have gone towards beefing up infrastructure level network security. Nadra's data is available for the whole world on websites and data dumps for people to use however they like. We don't have data protection law. We keep hearing that we will get one. Instead, there is talk of digital public infrastructure, also called DPI, which means that the government wants to digitalize governance processes but without the necessary network security in place, internet security in place, and without the national level data protection law. These initiatives will centralize data and can put everyone's data at risk. The IT ministry was also talking about a centralized health digital initiative. And I mean, imagine without the data protection law, without uh, a law that mandates certain security practices be placed, you are trying to centralize an entire country's health data. Um, and the state will also have unfettered access to it without a law that mandates some kind of checks and balances. And the way telecom or infrastructure works, the state does not necessarily have to have access to such a huge amount of our data unless it wants to. So, in cybersecurity best practices, for example, you have logs for whatever action is being taken and who is doing it. So there is transparency, and if something goes wrong, then the organization can look at the logs and data to figure out what went wrong at what time and who did it. But this standard practice obviously cannot apply or does not apply if the state itself is snooping on its own people. And in the recent MST report on surveillance in Pakistan that I'm sure most of us have read, they've written about how this web monitoring system has been installed in the tech infrastructure at Transworld, which is one of the upstreams in Pakistan, and some PTCL infrastructure as well. So while organizations can use DPI, deep packet inspection, and blocking technologies like a firewall for security, for the state, they can be used for surveillance as well, because cybersecurity procedures include recording logs, and depending on what the firewall is capable of, they may have logs which can indicate some identifiers that can eventually get back to you, right? So the Amnesty Tech reports indicate, for example, that if you do not use an encrypted email server, there is tech available to Pakistan that can intercept emails.
So, Sindhu, what you're describing, deep packet inspection technology, so it's essentially a dual use technology, right? Because initially, when it was installed, we were told that this was for grave traffic monitoring on our. But what we know also is that deep packet inspection technology is also used for surveillance and censorship purposes. So this is where a very critical question comes in, that if we're putting in security infrastructure, cybersecurity infrastructure, for example, or it's being used for filtering, how can it avoid harming digital economies? Because the economic impact of these two systems, the firewall and the web monitoring system that was installed in the past few years, we've seen the internet quality deteriorate, which is evident in how, are there glitches even in our recording?
So the way Pakistan has employed the firewall, it is done crudely. What we had and we still have internet issues. We're experiencing it right now. I experience it when I want to watch a TV show on Netflix or HBO Max. And they happen randomly. VPNs are either not functioning or working very slow. I personally use the VPN and I see that it gets blocked randomly a lot of the times at night. And blocking VPNs especially can definitely harm digital work because a lot of the times remote teams use VPN tunnels for security. For example, if you're based in Pakistan, you're able to access the data or tools from your company for that particular work within that VPN session or maybe a virtual session of some kind. And when you block VPNs, obviously you will not be able to access that. And they do it, international companies or remote companies do it for security purposes. So international companies will not compromise on their own security just for their Pakistani employees. So the average worker in Pakistan will lose out.
Right. And then what is the impact overall on, say, freelancers that work in Pakistan or tech companies that are based in Pakistan and, banking sector, for example? So how do we see the impact of this infrastructure on, the larger digital economy and the people who are working in it?
So in 2024, as we know, I think for the first time, the entire internet was complaining about on Twitter, on social media, everywhere there were complaints about slow internet, minimal connectivity, we're not able to open websites, forget shows, forget streaming. People were having a lot of people were facing a lot of problems in their work, whether they were working for companies within Pakistan, people who were freelancing for international companies, as a lot of Pakistanis do. Pakistan has been consistently in the top five countries that have the most that provide the most highest internet labor uh, globally, right? So, which means that, and of course, the majority of Pakistani population is young people, and a lot of them have to hustle. They're hustlers. They have got jobs in design and engineering and writing. And so, if you have internet problems, you're not able to consistently connect with, communicate with the client, or give them their work on time. Uh, Banks were obviously, if you have internet issues, so larger organizations do have backups. But again, if the internet is affected on the national level, there is very little use of the backups, right? Because the entire internet is affected. So definitely, every business's or daily operations were affected. The A lot of complaints we heard from individuals and freelancers and young people because, of course, they are working on an individual level. They don't have backups. They depend on funds that come from their projects. So I think that they were the most affected. And then eventually, I think the IT minister did reach out to one of their freelancer association members, representative, and they talked it out. And I don't know, and the internet seems to be now again functioning better, but the internet speeds and connectivity remain issues remain, as we know.
Yeah, and we're hearing about a 5G rollout in Pakistan. So it'll be interesting to know from you. We have this existing web monitoring system. We have, reports of this firewall being installed at, the ISP level. How will that interact with the new 5G rollout? Will it be compatible with that system at a technological level? Or will there be, a need for upgradation if the government really desires so?
So in the amnesty report, the same surveillance report, they have delved really deep into how China, the technology procured from China is they use, they've been able to use and upgrade and customize for other spyware or other spyware technologies or surveillance technologies that Pakistan already had. So, for example, whatever technologies it had bought earlier from US companies or Western companies, Chinese companies were able to customize that for Pakistan, and so they've been able to, carry on with the surveillance issues. The report did say that they do come across some technical issues, and Pakistan has apparently complained in one of the GR tickets, leaked data. They saw that Pakistan has complained that this technology is not blocking websites, etc., etc. So the 5G, I think the rollout will have little to no effect on the state's desire and the state's plans to carry out its surveillance the way it wants. They will simply upgrade if they want to. I think they'll just, whatever projects they already have, whatever tech they already have, if it needs upgrading, they'll just probably ask China or whoever they are in contact with. So 5G is mostly about speed and connectivity. It will not affect the surveillance, I think, surveillance infrastructure that Pakistan already has.
Right. So maybe we can now talk about accountability and the future, right? You've spoken about the lack of a data protection law, which is so important for governing data privacy. But we also, need to be talking about oversight and technological evolution, because if we have a deep packet inspection technology infrastructure available, then there's questions also of transparency, of procurement, of parliamentary or judicial oversight. So, as a reporter who's been covering cybersecurity in Pakistan, how do you see the role of, for example, the judiciary or the parliament and ensuring that the systems are put in place in a transparent and open manner, and that there's room for accountability for it as well?
So, on a broader level, if we look at what's happening in the world, countries with authoritarian governments are using firewall. Other countries, liberal democracies in the EU, as I said, are using multiple um, policy and other cybersecurity measures to beef up their securities. And in countries like the US, though there is spyware and malware, as we know, being used by the Trump administration and ICE, and I've come across a lot of initiatives and projects internationally that are researching on now the spyware ecosystems and who is using it, how does that, what's the pipeline? And in many cases, Pakistan has come up. Pakistan's name is always there. The first thing that I do whenever I come across a research like this, I go and search Pakistan, there it is. So I think we need to start really talking about mass surveillance and spyware as a democracy issue, lack of accountability, transparency, and not just a digital rights or access issue, which we've been doing because that's how usually we talk about, or at least Western democracies talk about. But in countries like Pakistan, with authoritarian governments, with in a country where the line keeps blurring and we don't know what is national security, the definition keeps getting expanded, and it's very difficult and also very scary to talk about these things because we've seen what happens. PECA is being applied to journalists very liberally. And then, of course, Pakistan unfortunately does not have a very good record of free speech or media freedom. So, and for the past 10 years, obviously, digital rights activists and journalists have talked about how um, the issues with how the PTA works, the issues with how the FIA used to work. The PTA under PECA has the mandate to block content. So we need to start asking why that is, because PTA's head, and I think majority of their whatever positions, top positions are occupied by engineers, right? So how do you expect an engineer to? I mean, they're not trained, right? Unless they're trained, maybe they have some kind of policy training. They have a certain content moderation training. These types of issues are they should be discussed in the parliament. They should be discussed in specific committees, whatever internet committee. And one thing that the government is still not doing is inviting digital rights activists. People have been doing work for the past decade on these issues, right? So the government does not talk to them. I was in a recent workshop, you were there too, and someone from Digital Rights Foundation uh, and other organizations also, they very openly talk about how that the government either does not invite them for any any consultations, or if they do, they just it's just a very they just invite them to submit their proposals, but they're never used or never implemented, and the government just goes ahead with whatever it feels is right. The FIA was criticized for a very, very long time. When the PMLN came into power, it stopped FIA from investigating cybercrime. Then again, the FIA was tasked with the same, and now we have the NCCIA. So I think it's this is beyond internet. This is beyond now. This is beyond internet. This is beyond national security. Mass surveillance is a democracy issue. If you are not okay with having a camera installed outside of your house or an apartment by the state, you should not be okay with the lawful intercept management, or hidden ways uh, that the state spies on us, because your smartphone has a lot of data, right? Where what applications you use, what you search on Google, your friends and everything. I mean, data that sometimes a common person also doesn't know that they have. So this is definitely something that the public, the media, the civil society need to really start talking about.
No, thank you, Sindhu. I think you've wrapped it up really well because you explained to us what the technical capabilities of a firewall is, how it functions, how it has been installed in Pakistan over time. But I think your last intervention, where you spoke about, the firewall and web monitoring system being a democracy issue, is critical. That guarantees the privacy of the home. And we've had a lot of, past jurisprudence that has talked about the importance of privacy and protections against surveillance. We have the Free Fair Trial Act, which says that if surveillance is to be carried out, there has sight of it, are critical issues. But in face of all of this, what we see now is mass surveillance infrastructure, as was detailed by you and as various reports in the past year have told us. And it really begs the question that where should the line be between cybersecurity, regulation, and surveillance, right? Because a lot of times we're told that what actually is surveillance, it's packaged as cybersecurity. And what it ends up doing is then undermining other rights of citizens. So we've seen how PECA, the Prevention of Electronic Crimes Act, has been used as a tool to silence journalists, activists, lawyers, politicians. And we're seeing now that even in that, due process is being violated. But on a larger level, questions of transparency are critical, because even now, with this whole debate about firewall in the past 2 years, there's been no particular transparency or confirmation from the government about it. And all that we know is through the private sector, and that too through very secret reports. So the hope is that we can have an open debate and discussion about how our data is being governed, how our data is managed. Sindhu spoke about how the Nadra database, for example, is so vulnerable. Just yesterday, I saw an influencer share a post on Instagram saying, "Oh, call record information, live location, family data is all available. Contact me." So people are openly trading this personal data in the black. And at the same time, that means the cybersecurity infrastructure is not protecting us, is not protecting our data. And that's something that, really has to be pushed for. And the parliament, the judiciary, and the executive, the government, have to play this role effectively. So that's all for today. Thank you for joining us. This is Usama Khilji signing off, and we'll see you next week with another episode of DigiPod on Dawn News English. Thank you.